My name is Ryan Fazio. I'm the State Senator for Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm very excited about our town hall discussion tonight about Connecticut's economy, taxes, and inflation, topics that are obviously top of mind for a lot of residents here and around the state. I'm very lucky to be joined tonight by an expert panel with the diverse types of experience to speak on the topic. And I'll start from the viewers left to right. First is Greenwich First Selectman Fred Camillo. Fred's a lifelong Greenwich resident who graduated from Greenwich High in 1980. He resigned as state representative for the 151st District after serving 11 years and as assistant minority leader in order to become Greenwich's first selectman in 2019. His professional experience includes being a small business owner, founding Greenwich Recycling, and working as a high school teacher, baseball coach, and real estate professional. We're very lucky to be joined by Fred in his workplace here at Greenwich Town Hall. Next is Marc Fitch to his left. Marc Fitch is an investigative reporter for the Yankee Institute, which is a think tank focused on economic issues. He's the author of several books and novels, including Schmexperts, How Power, Politics, and Ideology Are Disguised as Science and Paranormal Nation, Why America Needs Ghosts, UFOs, and Bigfoot. He won't be speaking about Bigfoot tonight, but maybe we'll have another event to succeed this one. He was the 2014 Robert Newbeck Journalism Fellow, and his works appeared in The Federalist, The American Thinker, The Skeptical Inquirer, WorldNet Daily, and Real Clear Policy. Finally, to my left, we have Beverly Dacee, who's the president of Amadex Stain Remover, a manufacturing business in Bridgeport. She's been the president of the company for 8 years. It's a second-generation family-owned business, and she's very familiar with the ins and outs of running a business here in Connecticut. She went to Wheaton College and the University of Chicago, on the other side of Chicago from my alma mater. Yes, Northwest. There you go. Which prepared her for running her company and bringing it forward and employing people here in Connecticut. So let's get started. This is obviously a foremost issue on the minds of residents here in our district and across the state and many people across the country. Connecticut's economy here locally and across the state has many great assets and attributes, but it also faces immense challenges and has done so for many years. I prepared a short presentation to kind of accompany our discussion, but broadly I wanted to segment the conversation in 3 segments. So first, the state of things in our state as is. Where are we now? The second, why are we here? What are the causes of both the good and the bad that we're facing? And finally, where should we go from here? What can we do as a state, as leaders, in order to make the economic future brighter for everyone in Connecticut? So I think we could go to the first slide. And basically what I'll do is I'll go through some remarks on each of the topics and then ask our, and then open up each topic to a free-flowing conversation with our expert panelists. So for instance, Fred could talk about municipal policy and efforts to create jobs and grow business. Marc can talk about statewide policy, and Beverly can talk about the challenges that job creators and businesses face, and obviously we'll go from there. So you can go to the next slide, Jenny. So the good, what's the good about Connecticut and Connecticut's economy now? Well, we have enormous built-in advantages, both as a state and as a region in this district, Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan. We have very, very high-skilled, productive workers and people here. We have the 5th highest rate of bachelor degrees of any state in the country, the 3rd most advanced degrees of any state in the country. We have a lot of natural beauty, from the shoreline to rolling hills of Litchfields. We have it all in this state. We have perfect location between New York City and Boston, a reasonable amount of density, although not any super dense cities. And we have very strong communities. I'm constantly impressed by the generosity of regular people as donors, as volunteers, and so on. We have some regional strength here in Lower Fairfield County. Over the past 10 years, we saw 3% population growth in Fairfield County, but compared to 0% statewide. And there's municipalities like Greenwich and Stamford especially who have seen even more growth and have attracted some new and large businesses. Obviously, the state felt some fiscal relief during COVID from the feds. make no mistake about it, you'll be paying that back in federal taxes in the future. But nonetheless, it was some relief to our budget at the moment. And finally, we have seen progress out of COVID. We have very, very potent and effective vaccines available, and Connecticut residents have openly chosen to get vaccinated at I think the second highest rate in the country after Vermont, which is obviously very important to saving lives, but at the same time, it's useful to helping the economy, getting people back to work, giving people comfort to consume, to go out to businesses. There was a study out in VoxEU, which is an economic journal out of Europe, that compared economic growth with the vaccination rates of states and countries, and found that there was a very strong relationship between higher vaccination rates and higher economic growth. So that's the good. And I think we can start with Fred, but Fred knows in the past year the bright spots that we've seen locally in Greenwich, but also knows some of the great characteristics of our region and our state.
Yeah, I think Ryan touched, great to be here, everybody. I think Ryan touched on the positives. Certainly our proximity to New York City and location near Boston, an educated citizenry, shoreline, countryside. But we faced still the constant onslaught of bad legislation, bad proposals from Hartford. Right before the pandemic, in 2020, when we took office here, we had a lot of vacancies, and our real estate was struggling a little bit in the backcountry, especially. And so we had come up with some ideas, including things like outdoor dining and making the business districts a little bit more pedestrian friendly. We did all that, and amazingly, the pandemic helped with a couple of those things. And our location in New York really helped us, because while this really exposed the ease of people transitioning to go south, where they can now work remotely and pay less taxes and keep their jobs. We did benefit from those in New York City moving here. We did not want to leave the region, but they did not want to stay in New York City. So just Greenwich's proximity to New York City really helped again there, but we can't count on that always. And so we're always looking to continually enhance Greenwich, so that whatever comes down the pike from Hartford, hopefully with more legislators like Ryan, that will reverse itself over time. But certainly we have to continue to be ahead of the curve to make sure that we remain so bright for people that they can balance it out and say, yeah, we have some negative legislation and mandates and high taxes from Hartford, but boy, that Greenwich, Connecticut is a good place to live in. So we want to keep that up, but it's a constant battle, and certainly we thank you for your efforts in Hartford, and look forward to that in the future.
Mark, go ahead. Maybe a little bit more statewide. What are the built-in advantages that Connecticut might have compared to other states around the country?
I think, well, we often hear we have a very educated workforce. Unfortunately, maybe our employers are still hurting people, but we do have that. We have a strong education background. We have, as you said, the proximity to the cities, which has served us well in the past, and hopefully the ability to reverse course at some point. We've been going kind of down the same path for a very long time now, and I hope that Connecticut has the ability. It doesn't have to always be the land of steady habits, that it has the ability to change as well, because the path we've been going on is not so great, but there is a chance to turn things around. And yeah, your point about the COVID numbers, absolutely. We're second most vaccinated, and that's doing well for our economy. We're not, so far, not having to reinstitute any kind of shutdowns or lockdowns or anything like that. Mask mandates are kind of being left in the hands of municipalities. So it kind of looks like we're coming out of it a little bit, even though we've seen those rates, spiking. And you know what? We also have a fairly interesting state. We have some kind of weird, quirky cities, and we have some interesting, weird, quirky towns, and we have some strange, customs and things that happen there. So, and that's part of the appeal of Connecticut is everything's a little different everywhere you go. So, I lived for a little while in Plymouth, and it was very nice. Now I live in New Britain, and it's an interesting place to be. It's it's got its own quirks, just like every other town in Connecticut. So, I think when people are considering whether or not to move here or whether or not to stay here, you have to take that into consideration, in that there is a personality in each municipality.
Good point. So sticking on the topic of quirks, Beverly, you've made Connecticut your home. You have your roots here. You have a small business that goes 2 generations now, and I believe is going to probably pass on to the 3rd generation too.
Yes.
So what is it about Connecticut that you love and gives it some advantages compared to other states?
I think we're all living in Connecticut. It's a great place to live, and it's beautiful. It's accessible to lots of resources. It's a very friendly state. People who are here love being here. It's just we're fighting really hard now to stay here because everything is being pushed against us. I'm curious of those of you who are here. Do any of you have businesses of your own or any business? Okay, just because I think we're kind of a different breed, trying to manage both living here and running our companies here, and we're in the middle of the vice. It's just pushing us, right, both personally and professionally, with all the public policies that are getting thrown at us. And what was interesting for me to come down here is, my company's at the other end of Fairfield County. I'm in Bridgeport. The attitude of Bridgeport legislators is that you exist to take care of them. And that's what I see, and that's what I know, and that's what I live with. And I'm in the belly of the beast every bloody day. We relocated to where we are in Bridgeport about 5 years ago. And to be very honest, a lot of people thought I had lost my mind to stay in Bridgeport, because they said, it's high taxes, it's just, bad, poorly run, et cetera, et cetera. And then I kept saying, yeah, but Bridgeport's a manufacturing city. And if we manufacturers bail, what's left? And how much more oxygen are we going to suck out of Lower Fairfield County if we can't support that community and make it more self-sustaining? The problem, though, is the public policies that are coming out of Hartford are not looking at where you guys are and where we are, and how Fairfield County is not the cash cow for the rest of Connecticut, which is what everybody thinks. And I think they do a lot of the bills that they put through with that in mind. And it's what's making things much harder for all of us, because our resources aren't going to grow in our businesses. Our resources are going to cope. And that is not what helps states grow. And I personally think that is what is choking the oxygen out of Connecticut, is that our resources are not going to growth. And I could go on and on about that, but I won't. But that's my quick moment. Just give me some feedback.
Well, thank you, Beverly. And that's a nice segue into the next slide, which contextualizing Connecticut overall as a great state.
Sorry.
I think it's common wisdom, it's common knowledge that we face enormous challenges. And this is very broad, but I have citations for all these statistics here on the slide. But Connecticut has one of the weakest economies in the nation in terms of growth. We have the 6th highest unemployment rate in the country. We have the 4th lowest rate of economic growth. We have the 4th lowest rate of population growth. And we have the lowest housing price appreciation over 30 years and the 10th lowest over 5 years. While our economy has grown at a weak rate, people currently are also facing difficulties. We have a very high cost of living and a very high cost of doing business and creating jobs, both of which are getting worse. So we have the 9th highest statewide cost of living. Obviously, Fairfield County's cost of living is higher than Eastern Connecticut or Northwestern Connecticut. We have the highest electricity costs in the continental US. That's really hitting people's pocketbooks, especially people who are on fixed incomes like seniors and others who have lower incomes. That's going to hurt them in the winter. And so we want to give them relief in the long run. There's a 7% increase in health insurance premiums on the individual market this year. It's, as Beverly will probably attest, it's difficult to find workers and materials in order to do business. And that's something I hear from a lot of small business owners around our district when I talk to them. And then we have very high debt levels in taxes, and those are slated to get worse if we don't make changes toward public policy. So we have all these great inbuilt advantages as a state, but the results are not positive over the past 10 years and several years. Things have been very difficult for the average Connecticut family. It's been challenging to make ends meet if you're in the middle, if you have middle income or lower income, and maybe many people with higher incomes and businesses have actually left the state because they found it more economically rewarding to live elsewhere. So this is kind of the reality that many people are facing today as well. And I think it needs to be recognized and said in order to make things better. Maybe we could go the opposite direction, start with Beverly, who kind of sees a lot of these trends in business on a day-to-day basis.
What we're experiencing right now, I thought when I took over the business in 2000, our family business, which my parents started in 1958, I took it over in 2007. So it was just before the big recession. And I can tell you the stressors of what's going on right now are far worse than what we dealt with in 2008. And I see you nodding your head. It's inexplicable, the tsunami that's coming at us right now with the combination. You know, I, as a manufacturer, saw the supply chain issues coming almost a year ago because I could see, you know, the increases I was getting in my cost of goods, and I would get notices of increases probably every 3 or 4 weeks, whereas prior maybe got them once every 6 months or a year, and they just kept coming and coming and coming, and I thought, oh boy, things are getting bad. And I made the transition when I took over our company to buy all of my materials only from domestic suppliers. So I wasn't dealing with, you know, the cargo ships out stuck out in California. I buy locally. However, as that mess was happening, people here in the States are going, I've got to find somebody now more local to buy from. And so the local people in the supply chain are now, they can't produce fast enough. So now we've got this perfect storm of nobody can make enough stuff for anybody. And so you have that issue coupled with obviously now transportation costs, which have skyrocketed. So you're just getting your goods from point A to point B and getting inbound freight from point A to point B. The numbers are off the charts. In the meantime, you're trying to mitigate that because you really don't want to bring your goods to retail to hurt the consumer.
Yep.
But what do? You can only absorb so much of this. It's just so difficult. And then in the meantime, as I had said to Ryan, we got slammed last year now with this new FMLA law, which is, as you probably all know, it's called Family Medical Leave. So now, what do we do if your employee decides, you know, grandma's not well and I'm taking 3 months off? What do you do about that? How do you manage this when you're a small business? And most Connecticut manufacturers are under 100, are really 50 or fewer employees. People don't know that. And so they go and they pass these legislations that are one size fits all. In the meantime, the rest of us are going, are you kidding me? I'm going to drown. So we are right now in this quagmire of supply chain, escalating costs, utility costs off the charts, and topped with, we don't even know when our employees might be taking time off in the next year because it starts in 2022. So it is a train wreck. And yet we have this wonderful state. In the meantime, I don't want to go too long, but here I'm in Bridgeport. We should be growing businesses and manufacturing in Bridgeport. No, what are they doing? They're building housing. Housing for people to work where? And so and then in the meantime, now they want affordable housing in the suburbs. Well, okay, so, but where are the people going to work? And that's the goal we should be focused on, but we're not. And I came today excited because I think Ryan is going to be a breath of fresh air in Hartford. I think we need more of this. We up in Upper Fairfield County, we're paying attention to what was going on in Greenwich, because we realized we need a bigger force and a bigger voice to help us get to where we all need to go. And it is a huge problem. It's not a small problem, it's huge, because you have a mindset there and a public policy that's focused on social programs, not on business development. And if we can't get past this, all that CARES Act money, once it's over, we're gonna be drowned.
Well, that was so well articulated that I
Sorry.
think we can all go.
Yeah, I'm done.
I've heard it head hard. But I mean, we're really lucky to have people like Beverly who've really planted their roots here in this state, who want to create jobs, who want to provide products, who want to buy locally. You know, this is what makes Connecticut great. So it's really disappointing and frustrating to see someone like Beverly face challenges like this. And Marc really has his finger on the pulse, I think, of the state as a whole, the state's economy. So maybe he can reflect on the aggregates that he's seeing in the state in recent years.
Sure. So basically, we came into the COVID-19 pandemic having never actually fully recovered from the 2008 recession. We had gained back about 85% of the jobs, maybe. Our neighbor to the north, Massachusetts, had regained 350% of the jobs that they lost in the 2008 recession. Connecticut missed out on one of the longest and steepest economic trajectories our country's ever seen since World War II. The national economy is going up, and we are just hobbling along basically flat. Right around 2013, we started losing population. More people were moving out than were moving in. And they were taking a lot of money with them too. 2015, I think the net loss of income from Connecticut, and I'm not gonna lie, a lot of it went to Florida, it was in the billions. I think it was 6.8 billion in net wealth migrated out in 2015. And we've had that net loss ever since, until recently, I think, and we don't have the numbers yet as to how many people relocated from New York into, well, probably Greenwich, you know. But you know, we'll get those soon enough. But yeah, I keep saying a once in a lifetime pandemic is not a policy. It's I saw a lot of people at the Capitol crowing about how everybody's moving to Connecticut and isn't this great, and they weren't moving here because there was some kind of opportunity they were chasing. They were trying to get away from this big scary thing happening in New York City. And so from there, I mean, we had, I mean, you saw the numbers that Ryan had. We had very low job growth for 12 years. We had very low per capita income growth for 12 years. Now, we always talk about being the richest state in the country. Now, when you look at per capita income, Massachusetts has not only increased their population, but their per capita income is almost even with ours. So that's, you know, a lot more people is spread out over. And so we've been hobbling along, missing out on an entire decade of economic growth. Why? Where were we? Now, I've talked to a couple different economists, you know, and everybody's got their, what they want to lay the blame on, right? You know, Connecticut, you know, high taxes. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. Massachusetts, they used to have higher taxes. They actually fixed that. Now they have a fairly flat rate, whereas we have, you know, the graduated rate. And, you know, there's a lot of people at the Capitol looking to increase that as well. And, you know, New York, high tax state, but it has New York City, it has Albany, you know, Massachusetts has Boston. You know, Connecticut, you know, we have some wonderful cities, but we don't have that size city. And so, you know, we are in between the two. But the economy has changed in those 10 years. Everything's online. This is online. I could do my job from Florida. I could. And the same goes for people currently living here. especially when you start talking about, some of those high income jobs. That's another thing is all that out migration, the people leaving had higher incomes than the people coming in. So we're replacing high income jobs with low income jobs. And not that there's anything wrong with having, not making $130,000 a year or whatever it was. But when the tax revenues start falling off and the legislators in Hartford start saying, oh, well, we don't have enough money. Where do you think they're going to get it from? They're coming right back to you. But now there's fewer people and now there's less money. So you have to increase your demands a little bit more. And that's kind of a vicious cycle that Connecticut got into between 2010 and 2020 when COVID hit. So we came in to that pandemic behind the 8 ball badly. And we're coming out of it and we're still behind. The last 4 recessions, Connecticut's job recovery has started to do this. It takes longer to get the jobs back if you get them back at all. So we had COVID hit, hundreds of thousands of people put out of work. Some of them are coming back. Some of them aren't. When you look at that unemployment rate, Connecticut was what, 6.2, 6.4, and the national was 4.2, something like that. So we're about 2 percentage points behind the national unemployment rate. What that Connecticut's unemployment rate's not telling you is that our labor force shrunk. We're down 100,000 people. They're just not in the labor force anymore. They're not even counted. Some of them could have been retirees that just said, hey, I'm done with this, time to move on. I don't know where the rest of them went, but they could be out there. Maybe they don't get counted because they're set up and they don't need to look for work right now. And we know that's how unemployment numbers are counted. Are you looking for work? If you're not, if you don't need to, then you don't get counted. But we saw a sizable drop off in our labor force. And I think we're getting to the point where you're going to have kind of a split economy. People who are doing very well, and we've recovered most of those jobs where people are in the middle to high income range. But we're still 40,000 short on the low income jobs. And that is problematic, because those low income jobs, they feed the economy. I mean, they are your waiters and waitresses. They are, your servers, your store attendants. That's who that is. And we need them. And they're not coming back right now. And that's creating a labor shortage, which, I can talk about inflation later, but that's a big part of it. So I'll stop there.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons a lot of us are concerned that the very rich are gonna be okay. They're gonna be okay at the end of the day. But if there's structural problems in the economy, the people who can't leave, the people in the middle who are on fixed incomes, seniors, middle-class workers, people raising children on medium income, low-wage workers, they're the people who are suffering the most if the broader economy doesn't work. I know Fred's seen successes down here in Greenwich, but he's also been a major leader in the state in the House of Representatives for 11 years before that. So maybe you could talk about some of the challenges you see across the state.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think the main reason Connecticut has not participated in the economic expansion, such as states like Massachusetts has, is, like Beverly said, other states are lowering their tax rates and creating environments for job creation. What does the Connecticut legislature do? Well, just this past year, even down here in Greenwich, I was testifying and debating the Connecticut legislature. They were focused on things like controlling local zoning and trying to make one size fits all be the law of the land here. Literally, they wanted to take away your right of a public hearing. They wanted to take away the town's rights to require off-street parking, which would have really congested areas, even certain areas in Greenwich. They wanted to, within a half mile of the main train station of each town, require four family plots. So if you look at Greenwich downtown, that would have gone into some of the most expensive neighborhoods and destroyed them. The whole goal, they admitted, was to devalue property to make it more affordable. Think about that. Your main investment in life is your home. You wanted to devalue it. It should show you how backwards and how not well thought out it was. It was pointed out by the zoning professional in Westport that was testifying that within a half mile of their downtown train station, they had about 4 or 5 townhouses built. And they were like $4.5 million. So she said, well, even if you achieve your goal of devaluing it by 50%, which would be a disaster for the towns and for the people especially, it's still $2.5 million or $2.25 million. Is that affordable? That just shows you how they think up there. They're focused on things, social policy. They go up there, they want to be social warriors. You know, everybody that I know that served up there, for the most part, has a sense of fairness. And I certainly came from a working class background. I want all the workers to do well. Right? I'm not certainly not anti-union. I was a teacher for a little bit. I was even in an umpires union. I had to join, but a long time ago. But you don't help the workers by making life hard for the business owner. And that's what they're doing. The mandates, Beverly, you're going through, that's the thinking. And as you said, they're not, a business owner doesn't really have a lobbyist up there like the unions have. Their lobbyist has to be, Senator Fazio or Representative Aurora. Those are their voices. And certainly that's why it's really important. The number one challenge when you look at these elections next year for the state legislature, if you know people in other towns, tell them to get out there and vote for people that are going to be balanced. Right? Be pro-business, you can be pro-worker and pro-business. They're not mutually exclusive. But unfortunately, I invite you to go up to the state capitol on the session day, post and pre-pandemic, and look at the ribbons, the velvet ropes, we call them. Look who's there. Look at the majority of lobbyists. It's all dominated by the unions. And again, I'm not anti-union. I was in the union. I remember my great maternal grandparents. My grandfather was born in Naples, Italy. He was a union Democrat, but certainly didn't behave like this. And certainly the mindset has changed. And so Connecticut, as we saw, has all these great attributes. We are missing the ball. All these states around us, well, not all, Massachusetts and around the country, have taken advantage of it. They have a different mindset, as Marc pointed out. We don't. And until you look, if New York City can change, right? In 1994, they elected a mayor who didn't care what the New York Times wrote about him. He reformed New York City, which was thought to be unreformable. And Koch did a really good job in the late 70s and into the 80s. They really did. Governor Kerry was okay, but Giuliani really did transform New York, and Bloomberg kept that up. And you saw what bad governance did the last mayor, who's unfortunately still in office for a few more days. It destroyed it, absolutely destroyed it. People are running there not just because of COVID, because of crime is out of control there. We have people here that were in other cities and towns like in Yonkers and but 45 years ago, those towns didn't have problems. Cities didn't have problems like they have today. Pay attention to what they're doing with zoning and what they're doing with, as far as mandates to businesses, because it'll come back to bite.
Oh, no, I think you were spot on. And what we're dealing with right now could be, personally, I think, the demise of Connecticut. Because one of the few things that we have to our benefit is local control. And local control is what's made our state beautiful. The town I live in Easton, we are 90% watershed. And as of last year, we are now servicing 200,000 people down county all the way to Greenwich. Now, as you said, you have your one-size-fits-all legislation about affordable housing. But what do you do in a town like ours, where the rest of this community is counting on our water? And what happens when we have no sewers in Easton? So what's going to happen to our water if we have to put in cluster housing? There is no cluster housing. Our zoning is 100% defined by our need to preserve water. So everywhere you go in Easton, it's either 1 acre, 3 acres of it. And it blows my brain explodes over this. How you have these legislators in Hartford who are so, as you said, such social justice warriors, which I don't disagree with. We need to take care of the poor. I do that every day where we work and the community that we're part of. We are active participants in helping those people in that city. But we do a far better job than they do out of Hartford, quite frankly, in helping our neighbors. And that's what gets me crazy, is leave it up to us and we will solve the problems. But when you leave it to government.
Well, you're absolutely right. And look at last year, who was leading this charge to take over local control zoning? The one person was from Texas, the wife of a mayor of Hartford. And she was trying this one size fits all. And I was debating her on one of the TV stations. And I said, and I got her to admit that Greenwich does a really good job with our affordable housing efforts. But I said, beyond that, I don't agree philosophically with you, because if you want to take your hard-earned money and you want to go live in a rural area in Northwest Connecticut, you move there because you want some space. They want to take that away. They want everything to be the same. Likewise, if you want to be in a place where there's some nightlife and there's more going on, you're going to want to go to a city like Stanford. What a great city, right? It's our little New York. I don't want that being like a suburb. I want it to be the place it is. They were trying to one size fits all. And a lot of the legislators, a lot of them, the 11 years up there, became great friends on both sides of the aisle. But the majority of them had never created any jobs in their lives. So I'd rather have somebody, I always said, who had a high school education and ran a fruit stand, rather than somebody with a Harvard MBA who was never in business. That you need somebody who can balance books and knows how to talk to people and create jobs, not just getting your information from a book or a textbook. That's the problem. And you have a lot of them up there and not enough job creators.
It's because I actually remember watching your testimony, and I've watched the business community and the business association go up to the Capitol trying to plead their case. And there is, you're talking like open hostility. A lot of these labor mandates have to go through the Labor and Public Employees Committee. And that committee is very tough on the business community. You can go up there, you can plead your case, you can say that this is going to cost me a lot of money, this is going to cost me workers, and you will get absolutely reamed up there, and I've watched it happen a number of times on a number of different subjects. And you've got a certain group that's pretty much placed themselves in charge over these kind of issues, and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen to the fact that there might be another side to this. And so, yeah, the business community goes up there every year. They get absolutely hammered, and they go back essentially with their tail between their legs, because there's nothing more you can do. If it doesn't get out of that committee, then it's not going anywhere. And maybe you're lucky you can get a bill through some other committee. It's a tough spot for employers in Connecticut at this point. And I actually was just looking at CBIA's survey this morning, and the second most cited concern for employers that they surveyed was what's coming from the Capitol. What are the lawmakers doing? Like that is, businesses need stability. And I think that they've seen a better friend in our current governor than they had in a long time. And I think they're very, appreciative of that. But they still have to contend with a legislature that there's a faction of it that's just openly hostile toward job creators.
Well, Mark and I were talking earlier and I'll share this with all of you. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but a few years ago, the governor and the legislature funded a program, and it essentially is to encourage startups. And the idea really came out of Massachusetts. It's interesting what you were saying earlier about data about Massachusetts versus Connecticut, because of course Massachusetts is thriving with all these incubators of businesses that are beginning to crop up, with all these new ideas coming out of the young, recent college educated people, as well as some of the people who are retiring. And so all of that is what's fueling Massachusetts' growth. But they have the infrastructure for it. They got past the recession. We have not. We don't have the infrastructure for it. So we have this great idea that we should do the same. We're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at this. And yet we're going, okay, but then what? And I sit back watching this, and a lot of people in Connecticut don't even know this is going on. But it's, and one of the questions I raised was, okay, so you're going to put hundreds of $millions in this idea about startups, having no infrastructure for its evolution. We all know the success rate of those is maybe 1 out of 10. In the meantime, at the expense of what? Because those resources came from where to go there, right?
And you're absolutely right. And what you and Marcus said, where as a state, a lot of these states like Massachusetts has a Boston to help attract as a magnet. We have a capital city. We don't even have a sports franchise there. Hartford Whalers left in 1997.
We got the Argos.
We have the Argos. Actually, best minor league stadium in the country.
Well, it's a taxpayer subsidized.
Yeah, we subsidized it. The shocking, there's a Starbucks right near the Capitol that when I was there, I used to walk. And it used to close at 7 o'clock and then it went up to 8 o'clock. I've never seen anything like that. 8 o'clock in a capital city. There was nothing going on there. And so if you're not focused on job creation, and instead, you're setting up legislators that are focused on being social warriors and controlling local zoning through mandates, you have to fight that. And so as we speak, the CDIA survey came out and people are talking about they're nervous about what Hartford's going to be proposing this year. They're already at it. They're already proposing to go after 1 and 2 acre zones. I think we're in Greenwich, we're the last 4 acre zone. Once that's gone, that's the beginning of the time to start looking to get out. And I was born and raised here. This is my hometown, and I'll stay and fight to the end. But I tell you, it gets hard to tell people that we're going to keep fighting when people don't vote. I don't know why in certain suburban areas they've elected legislators who sat silent when the local control effort was taking place last year. Thank God Ryan's where he is now, because his immediate predecessor never said a word and had to be coaxed into saying something and then blamed us for fighting to keep control of local zoning. So unless we get help, people in other towns, please get out there and tell them, pay attention, ask the candidates running what their views are, things like local control. What's your idea on the economy? How do you propose to support job creation and job creators? Again, you want our workers who work for these companies to have a great life and to work and live in dignity. But again, you don't accomplish that by making life tough for the person that writes the check.
And when you talk about being a warrior for social justice or improving the lot of the poor and the dispossessed, you have to create economic opportunity. And the best long-term anti-poverty program that ever existed is a full-time job. Before the recession, the COVID, the poverty rate for people with full-time work, any type of job, was 2%. The poverty rate for the population writ large was 12%. So you're talking about more than an 80% decrease in poverty rates for households with any full-time worker, regardless of the job or the wage level. Because a person in a full-time job, even if they start out on the bottom rung of the economic ladder is building skills and experience that will result in a better job and a raise and a better job, and maybe eventually owning the job and starting their own small business and creating jobs themselves. But in Connecticut, we have fewer jobs today than we did at the end of 1997. That's a fact. While the rest of the country has seen a 24% increase in the number of jobs across the country. That is a major indictment of the leadership of the state. So I think that's a good segue into the next part of the presentation, which talks about some of the reasons why we might be facing challenges, some of the specific policies. And then we'll end on hopefully a more hopeful note with some of the remedies that we could have for our economic station currently. So the next two slides are just graphs of this is the blue line is, you could guess, the jobs in Connecticut over the past 10 years, and the red line's the jobs across the United States over the past 10 years. And the next slide is economic growth, which is basically the same or worse. So we haven't recovered from the 2008 recession, and certainly not the 2020 recession, while the rest of the country has recovered both from certainly from the 2008 recession, but is already actually fully recovered and more from the 2020 COVID recession. So the next slide talks about some of the policies that could be, why are we here? Sorry, the one before that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Jenny. Just some of the reasons why the Connecticut's economy could be facing immense problems like we talked about. So debt and unfunded liabilities and the overall taxpayer liability, meaning the total number of debt, the total number of bonded debt and unfunded liabilities that the state and local governments have per taxpayer is $62,500 per person. So that means in order to wipe away all the debt of the state, that each and every one of us would have to fork over $62,000 to make us whole on the balance sheet.
Don't hold your breath on that.
Yeah, I don't feel too good about that. And that's why Warren Buffett said, don't invest in the states that have poor balance sheets, large overhangs of debt and unfunded liability. So that's a problem that's accumulated over time, in large part because we're paying an enormous premium, as Mark knows, on the insurance and pension benefits of state employees. They get paid on the whole about 28% more than the similar private sector workers. And then a lot of the spending, the wasteful spending, which is not just in state employee benefits, but up and down the budget, results in the second highest tax burden of any state in the country. That's both overall, according to the Tax Foundation, and for the average or middle class family, according to Wallet Hub. On top of that, to add insult to injury, and Beverly knows this well, according to the Cato Institute, a study that was released this year, Connecticut has the worst small business climate in the US. Boy, it doesn't get any better. And then finally, we have, according to the Pacific Institute, the fourth strictest regulatory structure: high cost of living, high utility costs. According to Pura, according to the state government, 15 or 20% of those electricity costs are caused by state mandates and regulations. High healthcare costs, which are rising. So the fact that Connecticut workers and families and businesses are keeping their head just above water is a real testament to their capabilities and their qualities. But the state government is making it as hard as possible on them to do so. They're tying an anvil around their foot while they're trying to swim it. So, Mark, you write about this malpractice, this political malpractice all the time. But I think, like any good doctor, you have to diagnose the cause of a disease, the root cause of the disease, before you try to solve it.
Well, yeah. So I mean, we can kind of start at the top there. You were talking about the state employee pension costs, right? I mean, it's not just state employees, it's also the teachers, and they have their health, retirement health benefits and everything like that. You know, it's really interesting because we had a law on the books that required the pensions to be fully funded starting in 1986. Okay, and that law got implemented, and we were fully funding the pensions. And then, I mean, it started under Weicker and then really exploded under Rowland. Connecticut has kind of a funny law. A union contract can actually supersede state statute. So
Yeah, so when Roland sat down with the state employee unions to negotiate, you know, they didn't want him laying anyone off. And he didn't want to raise taxes. So what did they settle on? They settled on underfunding the pension system. And since union contracts will supersede statute, just rode right over that law. And we are seeing the effects of that today. So we've got, last I looked, it's about 40 billion in pension, another 23 billion in retirement health care liabilities. And, you know, thanks to the volatility cap that was part of the 2017 bipartisan budget that came out. I mean, it was the last time the Republicans were even close to, you know, having parity. Yeah.
Well, the other piece of it too, Mark, that's interesting to me, and I don't know if people are aware, how the teachers' retirement numbers are calculated in Connecticut. And this is a calculation that goes way back to like the 60s, when teachers were not paid very much. So to attract teachers to go into that career in Connecticut, they gave them a really nice pension program. And the pension program is the average income, your average income over the last 5 years of employment, 70 and paid out at 70%. So people do the math. And as those teachers, if you've been there a while and you're getting your step increases, you're making many of them, you know, 6-figure incomes by the time they're retiring. Now dial that back to 70%. You're making $70,000, $80,000 a year in retirement until you're gone. That is a hefty price tag for all of us to be incurring. And a lot of people aren't aware of how we got there.
Well, yeah, and just,
right?
well, you know, and when we talked about like the overall effect, I mean, what, you know, all right, so we have a lot of pension debt. How does that affect you? This is Governor Dan Malloy. He instituted the 2011 and 2015 tax increases. He said that every dime of those tax increases went to pay for those pension costs. So everybody's taxes went up, and what do you get for it? Well, not really much. You're paying off you're paying off these promises that you made. And that's what they were. They're promises, and you have to keep them. But you end up with nothing to really show for it. And now we've made a great down payment on some of the pension debt thanks to the volatility cap. But still, you know, pensions are part of our fixed costs. By 2026, Connecticut's fixed costs are going to be 57% of the budget. So every dollar that you send to the state government, 57 cents is already gone. Now that's pensions, retiree health care, Medicaid, whatever lawsuits we have to settle, and bonded debt. That's going to be 57% of your budget. So you can pay more, and that's fine, but you're not going to get all the nice things that you think you're going to get out of state government for all the taxes you pay, because more than half of it is already out the door.
In the 2017 budget, there were lots of caps, including spending and volatility. And the reason why that was achieved was because the state Senate, for the first time in 30-something years, was tied at 18-18. And the House was 79-72. So really you had four races turning was the difference. And just to show you how that had changed, when I got elected in 2008 to the legislature, there was 37 of us on the Republican side against 114. So I always just a joke, we're 2 elections away from carpooling up there. But we got all those things. Why did they adopt our budget in 2017? Because there were still enough moderate and a couple conservative Democrats that voted with us, and they knew it. But when they have a super majority, and again, in this case it's the Democrats, but it could go either way. When you have a super majority, it doesn't matter. They would put the most horrendous legislation up my first few terms there. And at that time, there was more, 20 to 25 of the moderate to conservative Democrats would do what they would call taking a walk. It was a cowardly way of not voting. And at the end of the legislation, at the end of the session that night, somebody would write in the journal notations, Representative Smith was out of the chamber, missed votes for legislative business. And where he or she was down having a beer and out of the chamber, because it would have hurt them to have cast that vote if they voted with their caucus in their own districts, because those districts were purple. They could have gone either way. Milford was always a great example of that. Those 3 state reps changed in my tenure up there a couple of times. So when you have a supermajority, that's when you gotta be very, very careful. And the only time in those years when we were in the superminority where the balance of power shifted was in the last week, because the end of session, the last day of session ends at 12 midnight, can't go beyond that. So they're trying to get all this crazy legislative stuff out. And so we would start, Larry Cafaro was the minority leader. He would say, okay, they wouldn't call any of our bills out, the Republican bills. That's it, shutting the place down. And so everybody would start talking, and then they come over and say, no, okay, we'll give you a couple, but just let us, have these bills. But we would strike deals, but we'd fight the really bad ones. And so the balance and the power actually went over to the minority for the last week, because we were able to stop, as Warren Harding said, it was more important to stop bad legislation than to pass good. And that was the only time. Other than that, you're at the mercy. So again, it really behooves everybody to pay attention next year. You just need legislative balance, and that's the beginning of a turnaround.
And when you talk about kicking the can down the road, this makes it much more difficult on retired public employees to have confidence that their retirement benefits are going to be there. If you allow these problems to accumulate, it increases the possibility of a bankruptcy type event down the road where you're seeing 25% cuts to people's benefits because we're so deeply in the red. That's what's happened in actually bankrupt territories or municipalities. So we want to prevent something like that from happening. But also, it's not all legacy, because we've seen contracts passed in recent years that had obscene pay increases for some of the state bureaucrats. There was 12 state employee contracts passed in the 2019 term. That's with a lot of the current governor and a lot of the legislators in office currently. All 12 of them increased state employee pay. Some of them increased state employee pay by as much as 11%, 6% year over year on an annualized basis. During COVID, when we had the highest unemployment since the Great Depression, we allowed a 5.5% state employee raise to go through, even though other states had suspended them. The current governor ran on a debt diet, which is the idea of us reducing future bonded debt issuance, future debt spending on certain political projects. But even though that was his promise at the campaign time, once it came to actually legislating, the state government passed an increase in debt spending above what was done even under Dan Malloy. So the same problems that have been made historically are actually continuing to be made now, even if some people say otherwise. And the second point is that, again, this goes beyond some of the historic spending. That I hear a lot of my friends on the other side of the aisle talk about the importance of protecting our democracy and democratic principles. But if bargained law, if much of our legislation, much of the spending that's determined in our state, it can be determined behind closed doors in a negotiating process, and it is superseding state law that's voted on by your elected representatives. Again, the supersedence Marc talked about, that seems like a horrible abrogation of our basic democratic principles, that the people are sovereign, the people rule, the people whom you vote into office get to decide what our laws are, how much of the money's coming out of your pocket, what it's being spent on. Rather, it's spent on these legacy items in negotiations behind closed doors without good public oversight. And that betrayal of democratic principles has led us to the material circumstances we're in today. And then, of course, beyond the spending, we see regulation, we see tax increases. Remember, 2019, even under the current governor and state and many of the state legislators, we increased taxes by about more than $1 billion a year, actually, if you include all the tax increases. So just the fact that we didn't have a tax increase in 2021 when we had all the bucks from the federal government doesn't mean 2 years before we didn't increase.
Well,
taxes.
yeah, I mean, there's tax increases in 2019. They're called fees now. I don't know if you got the memo.
I did it.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
So, yes,
Update.
no, it's, you know, it's those kind of things. It's never, you know, it's not the income tax increase. It's not a sales tax increase, sales tax expansion. You start taxing things you didn't tax before. You start adding on fees to things that, you know, were increasing fees and things that you know, had fees on or didn't have fees on. So it was a lot of nickel and diming to get to $1 billion. But yeah, if COVID hadn't happened and we hadn't been flooded with federal money, we would have been looking at a substantial, you know, deficit to fill. I think was 1.6. I think it was around there. You know, but we got all this federal money in. We used that to pay the deficit, and we've got some left over. We're going to be dishing out a lot of good stuff with it. I think could be landing ourselves in some more hot water. It's something that we do have to pay attention to because federal money runs out 2023. We will have, you know, as long as, even if the very nice projections that we have right now hold true, we're still going to have deficits ranging from 900 million to about 1.2 billion, I think, around there, after that. So COVID money gone, still have deficit. So I don't know what they'll do to try to fix that. I can guess based on history, but it is something that, you know, it'll probably be a, you know, campaign issue coming up in the election year is, you know, what are we going to do after this? And we'll see what people have to say. But yeah, we got bailed. It's a terrible thing to say. I don't want to say we got bailed out by COVID because it's been a terrible tragedy and a lot of people lost their lives. But fiscally, at the state, you know, they have all this money now, and sometimes I think that when the state finances are good, you know, and they're like, oh, look, we don't have to raise taxes on anybody. I mean, some of them tried to, even though they didn't need to. But, you know, they didn't need to. They were able to fill their budget deficit, and they say, hey, Connecticut's doing great. And it's like, you're doing great. The rest of the state needs a little help.
And 11 other states in the past 2 years have actually cut their taxes because their fiscal balance has improved so much. So you can't really brag about not raising taxes when 11 other states with all the cash inflows that they're seeing are actually cutting taxes.
One thing I wanted to add to all of this conversation, because I think it's really, 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 really important for all of us, no matter where you live in the state, whoever is participating in watching this session tonight. I live with having the state have their hand in my pocket as a business owner and trying to take as much as they can away from me and this asset for the public good. We are about to see that shift. All that those of us in business have been living with, we are about to see that happen with our homes. And it's not something to take lightly. I think you probably are seeing this as, you know, the leader here in Greenwich. There is an organization led by the mayor of Hartford's wife called Desegregate CT that is formidable. They succeeded in getting the legislation that they have passed currently about our properties and zoning. And they are, I think, you know, our homes are our most important asset because it's a roof over our heads. It's where we live. It's our sanctuary. It's why we are in Connecticut in the first place. And all of a sudden now I see that, at least when I would leave my business, I could say, okay, I'm going home and I don't have to deal with the state coming at me anymore, other than paying my property taxes. Now, all of a sudden, all the stressors I'm experiencing with my business, I'm about to experience with my home and my community. And it's very disconcerting. And I think if the people in the state don't mobilize and push hard and push back hard, we're going to fail. And we're going to lose authority over what's happening in our community and how we live where we live.
And I think
Do you agree with me?
absolutely, and I think you also fight it on some of their turf. So when introduce these bills next year. I plan to testify and debate and throw it again if I get the chance. Use the environmental angle and argument, because not only does this, devalue your homes and promote enhanced congestion, it increases impervious surfaces. So anytime you take away soil and you add concrete, this flooding issue, we just had a 500-year storm, but we're now getting 25-year storms pretty frequently. That's exacerbating an already bad situation. And I asked the governor, to his credit, asked him to come for a meeting, and he came to the office 2 weeks ago here. And I stated that. I said, we need a break. Every single municipality needs a break now, because our infrastructure is old. Everybody's infrastructure is old. If you talk to any mayor or first selectman or woman around the state, they'll tell you, it was built 80, 90, 100 years ago. It wasn't meant for this much construction. But now, with 8-30G hanging over your heads and every developer putting a gun over a municipality and saying, you don't approve this, I'm gonna, pull the 8-30G card. All of a sudden, your neighborhoods are very different. And it's so skewed now that they succeeded up there in saying that you can't use the word character when you're trying to protect your neighborhoods, because it's a racist term apparently. And so I mentioned in one of the testimonies, I say, even though I totally disagree with that, I'll keep using the word character. But for our purposes here, it's architectural integrity. Same thing, but that was acceptable. Architectural integrity was acceptable, but character, they push, it's like starting a football game and the other team has the ball on your own 35-yard line. You can't start there. You have to kick off. You got to push them back in there. The minute you say, well, we'll start here because it's not as bad as before, you're losing already. And so, as we're talking right now, they are all meeting and they're preparing their bills. When I was up there, I knew the game. But I think with inflation as bad as it is right now, and you're seeing what happened in November around the country, people are starting to wake up a little bit, and there's a pushback. That may come here to Connecticut, and I hope it does, because there's nothing that Connecticut needs more than legislative balance. It's critical, and we need it yesterday.
Well, and I will add to that, as someone who is at the front line of what we're all experiencing with regard to inflation, I can say with great confidence, we've got at minimum another year ahead of us. I don't care what they say out of Washington. I am still getting those increases. I am still getting notified of future increases. And I am at the front end. I'm the first line of, indicator of where things are going to be at retail 9 months from now. And it is not slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating. So I don't believe a darn thing they're saying out of Washington. And that this inflation we're only halfway there.
Yeah, there's
So,
still,
do you agree with me, Mark?
yes, I do. They're still pumping money into the economy, and you have to do it sometimes, but the way it's going at this rate, no, that inflation is not going anywhere for a while.
And the Build Back Better, if that passes, it's supposed to be deficit neutral over 10 years. It's obviously not going to be. That's bill of goods, but the spending is front loaded. So the spending is going to come where we already have inflation. And so it's probably going to be $500 billion of new deficits in addition to the $1 trillion deficits we already have in the near term, which is going to further exacerbate the inflation that was caused in part by the $2 trillion deficit finance spending bill that we had at the beginning of 2021, in addition to the money printing, in addition to the redistribution that is persuading workers and putting them in bad place, in a horrible circumstance, and persuading them not to re-enter the workforce, causing a lot of the shortages and raising prices further. So if we don't do something on the policy front, if we don't have a positive change in our state policies, then things are going to continue to get worse. So I think we could go on to the next slide, the final slide, and talk about some ideas that we should offer in order to make things better, to raise economic prospects for Connecticut, and then we can take questions from the audience. So some ideas. The first would be to make the tax code more fair, more simple, and reduce income tax rates in particular, which are probably have the strongest effect on economic growth, job creation, cost of living. So that can be done. There's $6 billion of special income tax deductions and expenditures in Connecticut. Some of those, if they're taken away, can be used to finance an income tax cut for perhaps as much as a few $1,000s on the average family in this area. We need spending and budgetary discipline. It doesn't necessarily need to be spending cuts. We just at least have to stop the growth of spending at the rate we're seeing, which is 3 or 4%. Inflation might actually be a help in that regard because the real spending actually decreases. But we need to put the state on a debt diet. We need to reduce wasteful government programs that don't actually deliver significant benefits to the population. We need to incentivize localities to spend a responsible amount, not give them malincentives to spend more and more, which raises your property taxes and also reduces the economic base in the state. We need regulatory reforms because Beverly, I'm sure she'll tell you, doesn't have a large team in her HR department and lawyers and lobbyists at on speed dial in her small business, which is the same for most small businesses, like big businesses do, where they can maneuver the regulatory code and the tax code and all the legal liabilities. So occupational licensing reforms, thresholds on regulations, cost benefit analysis for any major new regulation, like we have for spending bills, the amount of spending that each new bill is going to cost the taxpayer. We should also look at the amount of economic cost that new regulations are going to impose. Smart rule changes to reduce utility costs, healthcare costs, higher education costs. There's no reason we shouldn't freeze university education for the public universities, which has increased 5% a year. Other states have done that with success. We should try to target high growth, high value industries. Crypto, there's obviously some in-migration of crypto businesses in Connecticut. I think we should do a blockchain task force like Wyoming and Texas did in order to shore up the rules around cryptocurrency and try to incentivize some people in that industry to move to Connecticut. And finally, the basic responsibilities of government are important too. Good schools, public safety, other basic responsibilities of government that we've ignored in order to pursue social justice in this state. Those need to be delivered. That's what the people want. And that can also help bring people in here, bring jobs to the state, bring economic opportunity to people. So Beverly, as a small business owner, what are the few things you'd like to see the state do that would increase your prospects of investing in Connecticut?
Leave me alone. No. It's just, get out of the way. That's what they do. They get in the way. And the legislators don't, they don't listen. They're not interested. We have a legislative majority right now that is tone deaf to what's going on in this room tonight. They just don't hear it. And we're talking about trying to build what they call workforce to work where and to do what. They haven't even figured that out.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what's so frustrating. So they already have policies in place, employee policies in place that are undermining the interest from other businesses outside of Connecticut to come to Connecticut because it's not that there's no cost benefit to coming here versus someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just, they're in the way. That's the only word I can say.
I like that. It's simple. So maybe just a couple minutes from each of you and then on maybe a better way forward, if you're willing. And I'm not sure Mark is willing, but
No,
and then we can take questions.
no, it's people will sometimes ask me like, what can we do to fix Connecticut? And I always tell them if I knew that, I'd probably be getting paid a lot more and be in a different job, So I'm glad Ryan's here.
But the state legislators don't get paid.
No, but you know what to do. So, but no, I work for Yankee Institute. Part of their job is putting out studies and policy recommendations. We have a policy shop with some very sharp people in it, and we've been making recommendations and we've been showing lawmakers the numbers. And I get this a lot. It's usually from like old school guys. They're like, well, just show them the numbers and they'll understand. I'm like, oh. Well, I did that, it's the numbers don't matter. And I hate to say that because they do, but they don't matter in politics. You know, it's, you know, they see them, everything that Ryan showed you and everything we've discussed about what's happened in Connecticut over the past 10, 12 years, they all know that at the Capitol. They know. They read it in the paper, you know, some of their favorite, you know, maybe left of center writers have even written it. They know. They just think that what they're doing is somehow going to fix it. And it historically has not. You know, you talk about the poverty rate. That's been pretty steady for the past since the 90s. You know, so you've done a lot of, you know, social spending and you've done a lot of social programs. The poverty rate's still the same. So, you know, and it's great that those programs help people, but like you want to help people get out of poverty. So what can we do moving forward? I mean, you have the usual things. You can, I love the closing some tax loopholes idea, because yeah, a lot of these tax loopholes are written for specific corporations that, you know, maybe somebody loves up there. And so you can close a lot of those, take in more revenue, use it to lower like the business tax rate or the income tax rate, or pick a tax rate. You know, make it a little more hospitable for people living here and make it more hospitable for people moving here. This is a true story. I was born in New Jersey, lived there till I was 6 years old. My father was a pilot flying out of Westchester Airport, and he had this terrible commute trying to go from northern Jersey all the way over to Westchester, and he finally was like, we have to move. They could have moved, we could have moved to New York, we could have moved to Connecticut. He said, Connecticut doesn't have an income tax. I'm going to move to Connecticut. They now live in South Carolina. They do. And I miss them. So, but we do have to start looking at, you know, I was thinking about this when Beverly was speaking earlier. You were talking about the, you know, the startup pipelines and the networking and stuff out of Boston. You go to Boston, you throw a rock, you'll hit like 3 schools. Okay, they are loaded with universities and college students and tech and all that kind of stuff. They have that. They can do that because of what is there, you know. And we, as a state, it's like we don't quite understand who we are sometimes, and we don't recognize where our strengths and our limitations are. So we'll look at Boston and be like, we can do that. Then we look at California and say, we can do that. But we're not California, we're not Boston, we're not Massachusetts, and we're not New York, we're Connecticut. And you have to play to your strengths. You have to try to address your weaknesses, but you can't sit there and bank on your weaknesses. You know, you can't sit there and look at a place like, you know, New York City and say, why not us? We can do that too. No, you can't. And you're learning it the hard way. So I think what Connecticut probably needs most is a reality check at the Capitol. And if you want to start turning things around, listen to the businesses for once. I mean, you haven't done it in 12 years. Just give it a try one time. You know, like just try something new. Go out on a ledge, you know, and listen to the businesses this time. You know, listen to the people who are actually on the ground in the state, who have made this state, you know, what it is. And, you know, Fred, you're down here in Greenwich. I mean, you guys pay a lot of the bills up there.
About 14%.
Yeah, you pay a lot of the bills up there, and honestly, every year they just seem to just come back and try to eat you up.
And we're one of 169, and we're about 14 to 15% of that tax revenue. I would agree with both Beverly and Mark, and I'll be short. I would cut tax rates across the board to make it the lowest in the region. Make it the lowest in the region. Yeah. Who cares about, you know, as it goes against tolls, tolls wouldn't even been that big of a deal if our income tax was not what it was. It started going south on us in 1991 when we passed the state income tax, which was only supposed to be temporary. Not only was it not temporary, it keeps growing. And so we got rid of county government in 1960 here. that was always the last, 60 years, our advantage over New York State. After the tenure of Governor Malloy, our advantage is razor thin. Even with county government, we're just a little bit better than New York now. And granted, the other counties have different tax rates. It's not that much of a difference. I would send that message to the business community and to residents around the country. Connecticut truly is open for business, not just saying it, but doing it by lowering the tax rates to the lowest in the region. Can it be done? Sure. New York, well, again, I thought, I mentioned before, was thought to be unreformable. Moscow on the Hudson. It took a strong mayor in 1994 to go there and turn it around and get criticized every single day. We heard before, since the Great Recession in 2008, Massachusetts has reclaimed about 355% of those jobs. Connecticut, 85%. That's not even close. So as Ryan said, we celebrate this year, there was no tax increase when other states were decreasing. And we did so because we're getting money from the federal government. It can be done. You have to remain an optimist, but you have to also work. You just can't say, I believe in it. You got to get out there and you got to work hard. You got to support candidates that will promote pro-growth policies and get out there and work. But it absolutely can be done. Remember, I was growing up, Massachusetts was called Taxachusetts. It was a joke. Not a joke anymore. And we got a very popular governor there now. And I tell everybody who's thinking about running for governor, look back to James K. Polk in 1848. Say, I'm going to serve one term and one term only. And here's what I'm going to do. Tell the people 3 or 4 things. Get them done. You'll get killed every single day in the press. They'll protest outside Prospect Street in Hartford, but history will judge you well. Just do one thing.
Well, we're blessed to live in a great state with great people and all the attributes necessary to succeed, except the right state leadership. So the premise here, the lesson here is that with a positive change, that the state can succeed and there can be hope. So we'll end on a note of optimism and take your questions. And I thank you all for coming. Caitlin?
So if you could.
You just stand up, Caitlin.
Thank you, good evening. Thank you for hosting this symposium this evening. So I'm excited about the prospects and I know that the state needs innovation from a business perspective. But more short term, as a practicing attorney in the area of the mandates and the COVID passport potentiality, what are your guys' positionings regarding this impact on unemployment and this limitation now on the free exercise clauses of the Constitution, but also the local issues regarding you want to create new businesses, but now you're already discriminating against the potential workforce. Because I have seen through my practice, many people disaffected by these policies in New York, which of course is now trending over here to this state.
Yeah.
So I wanted to understand that the level of importance is resonating with this conversation on the economy as it relates to employment and people being already, you're saying there's not enough jobs already, and now we're already slicing away the employment pool.
That's a good question. If you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing here in Greenwich. We haven't done that. What I'm finding is because of the money that was coming in from the federal government was being paid to workers more than they were making. It's been hard for small businesses to get people back to work. That's been the main concern. Certainly, there's been nothing from the town here. We've left that open now to the businesses to, when I go to Odalise every day, they say, wear a mask. I wear it. Most businesses don't, and I'm fine with that too. I think we've done the right thing here. And I think people took it seriously. I think people got vaccinated. But at the end of the day, you can't live your life in fear. And certainly we may have other variants coming down the pipe, but we're in a good spot. We're in a really good spot. We've had the miracle that vaccine was pretty quick, but people have done the right thing. And you don't want to live in fear. You don't want to upend your lives. I tell people, don't cancel things. Just go out, be safe. Keep your distance, wash your hands, things we were told when we were young. But certainly the town has not done anything. Now, New York, I know they're requiring it. I think you have to show a vaccine passport to go to a restaurant. But New York's a whole different story in the city there. I hope and pray that doesn't come to Connecticut. When in 2020 in March, when I declared a state of emergency, they gave the office of first selectman broad powers, but he couldn't conflict with an executive order of the governor or the president. So if Governor Lamont wants to say, you know what, everybody here needs to wear a mask, you need a passport, he's still got emergency powers. I took mine off when there was no emergency. The legislature unfortunately gave him that, and I say that with all due respect, because I like the governor, but I think you have to save emergencies when they're true emergencies. And so, you know, you see these emergency certification bills in Hartford when they're not emergencies. And that's what it says, an e-cert bill, and it's a way to get around a public hearing. Don't claim it's an emergency if there's not. If there is, you have to monitor it daily and you react to it. But right now, from locally, my answer is, I think the biggest impediment to some of the smaller businesses is what the federal government's doing, and a lot of people have not gone back to work.
Yeah, no,
But just as a follow-up, Lamont did mention that is his intention for the vaccination card. As we're talking about that, not that the government here in Hartford affecting the policy here, that will ultimately affect what occurs here.
I'm going to speak to this because we manufacturers never closed. Governor kept us open, which was one of the smartest decisions he made, because with the supply chain problems, if he had closed us, we would be really in trouble. Fact of the matter is, we've all pivoted. We've all done what we had to do. It's a year and a half later, and the accommodations we've made, we will continue to make, keep on going. I don't have any requirements at my company. Most companies that I know and work with don't. We just are continuing to go forward because this is life. Period. That's it. End of story. It isn't our focal point anymore. We have bigger problems than the pandemic, quite frankly. And the pandemic now is going way over here in terms of our reality and our economy and our future and the struggles we are facing currently, are going to be facing. It is a sidebar. Health and health issues are part of being human. We're going to be living with them for the rest of our lives. It's just the way it is. But as an employer, and and those of us all in manufacturing, whether we're small businesses, big businesses, we all ran it the same way, which was with due diligence. But that's it, and we have not skipped a beat. So I think we are really the poster child for where everything should be today, because we've been going from day one.
Yeah, and on a state, from my perspective as a state legislator, I am against statewide mandates. I'm against emergency powers. I think these decisions should be made democratically and as locally as possible. I think we should empower people with access to medical remedies and vaccinations to choose to get vaccinated and protect themselves. But by and large, we need to empower people to make decisions in a responsible manner and be free to do so one way or the other. So that's basically my position at the state level. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, I mean, it's obviously the virus is never going away. I mean, you get an occasional case of bubonic plague pops up every now and then too. With the vaccine passport question, I mean, a month back, I went to a show at the Oakdale Theater in Wallingford. You had to bring your vaccine card, fine. Went in there, had a great time, showed my card, no big deal, but there's a big difference between, am I gonna, I always keep my card at home, I'm not gonna carry it around with me because I don't want to lose it, so I understand the ease with which the governor is trying to make that, kind of technology available. But it's also a difference in venue. I mean, this is something that, restaurants and business owners will have to decide whether or not they're going to take it up, but I'll show my vaccine card to get into the Oakdale, but I mean, if it's Applebee's, I don't know if I'm going to I don't know if I'm even going to go through the trouble of taking it out of my wallet or getting it out of the house or whatever. I'll just eat it home. So I think that's something that business owners are going to have to contend with.
And so Beverly has to run. I'm very appreciative of her coming down here and taking busy time out of her schedule.
I'm sorry. Found this time well spent because we're all busy at this time of
Thanks to
year.
you.
So
Be careful.
thank you very much for it.
And the other three of us, I mean, I'll stay however long, but we'll stay for a little bit longer and take a few more questions. The other thing I forgot to mention is that please come to the front to ask your questions, because that's the microphone and it picks you up, I think, in a certain radius. Why don't we, Dan, you come towards the front, the same with Sean and JD. Just come towards the front to ask your questions so the people online can hear you.
Thanks, Mark, Ryan, Fred, Dan Quigley, Greenwich resident. Question I have is about the cities in Connecticut. So we don't have a naturally like a magnet city. We don't have a city that draws people from other states like some of our surrounding states do, New York, Boston. But we've seen cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Miami in a different way in the 80s regenerate themselves and become really prosperous. And Detroit has issues with the auto industry after the financial crisis, but it's come back. What can Connecticut do to make its cities vibrant again? And what can it do to attract people to want to move into them and bring them back so that they can pump some blood in the economy? It's an easy one.
Well, I mean, I think Stanford seems to be doing pretty well. I gotta say, like Stanford's doing well. Danbury is doing well. I lived in Danbury for a while, and I lived there. I watched it, kind of turn a corner.
Yep.
And so, yeah, you have, two cities that are doing fairly well. I mean, New Haven. I know New Haven has some, financial problems, but I mean, they have Yale there. I mean, that's just having that kind of university there is just it's an engine, they consistently get, people coming in internationally from other states and everything, so they can do the residencies there. Obviously, just the stature of Yale University alone, but what does that leave you? It leaves you with Waterbury, which used to, long ago, JFK visited Waterbury. I mean, they pretty much like manufactured almost every bullet for World War II. From my understanding, I understand Hitler was trying to send a U-boat up the Naugatuck River. I don't think he would have gotten very far. But and then you have Hartford. Hartford, I think in both cases, this is something that I found in visiting other cities, albeit bigger, more well-off cities. I was down in Austin a few years ago, and everybody's there is having fun. It was shocking. Like I feel like I don't see that in Connecticut. Like everybody's outside having fun. I know this was pre-COVID. Bars are packed, lines around. Why don't we have that? Why aren't our cities like where are the clubs? Where's the nightlife? Where's the fun? I always say that if you have a good economy, if people have fun money, like they have money that they can have fun with, and I think there's kind of a lack of it, and it's a shame. There's I spend a lot of time in Hartford. I work there. My girlfriend lives there. It's so we're out in Hartford a lot, and you want to see it do well because it's this kind of quirky, fun city. It has some very neat places, like some just interesting neighborhoods, and so you want to see it do well. But I think you have an abysmally high business tax rate there, 76 mils. It's the highest in the state. So that doesn't help too much, and it's kind of like now you have people from Travelers and some of the major insurance companies. They're not going back to the office yet, and they're talking about turning the Hartford Hilton there into residential. But Hartford Hilton used to be packed with people flying in as consultants and for all these conventions and things like that. I'm a little worried as the effect that COVID has had on that city, and how do you turn it around? I'm not sure. I don't know.
The only thing I would add is keep your city safe and clean for its residents, especially the residents who don't have the resources to go flee to a more expensive place to live. The fact that homicides have almost tripled in New Haven in a few years and nearly doubled in Hartford is a absolutely horrible indictment of the leadership in those states. We need smart, proactive policing policies to keep people safe, especially our most vulnerable residents in our most vulnerable cities. So that's first and foremost, it's basic responsibility of government. You need fiscal responsibility. The property tax rates are like 7 times as high in Hartford as they are.
Yeah,
That's
it's
insane. Yeah. Fewer state mandates, good schools, gives school choice to people who are stuck in failing schools. I think there's any number of positive reforms that can be made. Sean.
Okay, I've got a couple of points to go on what she said before. with the vaccine mandates. I actually have a friend who recently left a six-figure job because they didn't want to be vaccinated. Personal reasons, whatever. What about those poor people? When all these mandatory vaccination things get turned into courts, these people are still going to be out of jobs because they're not going to be able to walk back in to the jobs. And then you talk about cities. In Connecticut, our cities are not a help, they're an albatross because they're drawing the largest portion of our tax dollar to support those cities because they're not supporting themselves. Good case in point, I don't know how Yale gets away in New Haven. I have no problem with them being no taxes on their classroom buildings, their athletic buildings, their dormitories, everything else. When they're buying up entire city blocks of commercial space, and that's tax exempt property, and that's what they're doing with their endowment money. They have become the biggest real estate holder in New Haven, yet they're not paying any taxes. I happen to own a condominium in New Haven, and I'm paying 48 mils, I think, on a condominium up there because all that good property in New Haven is not taxable.
Good. Or do you want to? I mean,
Yeah, that's a
I am very sympathetic to the point about Yale. I think on the vaccination thing, we want as many people to get vaccinated as possible. I'm very pro-vaccine. I think there should be access and education. We should persuade people to do it. We shouldn't force the few people who don't want to do it to do it. Compulsion's not a virtue. I just say, like everything else, we need balance. Empower people, educate people, give people access, but don't force. We have 84% fully vaccinated adults in Connecticut. That's very high. That's great. I'm very happy about that. But we don't need to be putative to.
Because an unvaccinated person isn't impacting a vaccinated person according to the science. They might only impact themselves. So if they make the choice to not be vaccinated, they're taking their own chance.
And if I may follow up on your behalf, sir, the implication regarding the discrimination for this unprotected class and the imposition of the medical informed consent of a government persuading a population to undergo a medical procedure is outrageously illegal, with all due respect.
Whatever happened to HIPAA laws?
And thank you very much.
So just two more questions. Fred's got to
I guess
go. Thank
we
you,
see
Fred.
where the pharmaceutical lobby has gotten.
Thank you, Ryan. This was terrific, and the questions were great, and thank you.
I'll stick out with you.
Tell
Okay.
Mr. Lamami say hello. Tell Mr. Lamami say hello.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Just take two more questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator. So we talked a lot about tonight about what a state should ideally do about tax and regulatory reform. But what can a citizen do who does not have public office? Beyond just Facebook ramblings, beyond just letters to the state, what can we do? Attending public hearing? Do they actually work? Protest? What can we do even between elections?
I think that's a great question. And I would say, I do think letters to state legislators are effective. I look at my mailbox every day and sometimes I get great ideas and great advice from citizens who know more about something than I do. That's very useful. I think doing public testimony on bills is useful. I think that volunteering for local government is very useful. All those ideas to get involved in a local level in small ways can make an enormous difference, especially if you add up a bunch of citizens doing that in their totality. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I think for one thing, emailing your legislator is effective, but if you can get kind of your friends to also email that legislator, if they see one email, they go, oh, okay. They see 10, and they start wondering, well, what's going on? Why, apparently this is a concern. And you discuss, going to protest. Yeah, there's rallies happening everywhere. I mean, I don't know what your political leanings are, but I'm sure you can find, and you know what? They tend to work. They get media coverage, and then it's on the news, and the lawmakers from other parts of the state, who aren't even in your district are looking at it being like, well, maybe I don't want to vote for that. Maybe I do want to vote for that, because they see that people are out there activated about it. And that's one thing that, has been kind of interesting the past few years, is there has just been a lot of activity. I mean, people have gotten activated, the whole tolls movement. I mean, that was huge, but it wasn't even just that. It's, there was a push for school regionalization in 2019. That got people really wound up. You have the zoning thing that's going on now. I mean, you have activists on both sides of that debate. So there's plenty of groups out there that, if you want to volunteer a little time or, send an email on their behalf and kind of join in their party, it works. It does. And, you see legislation coming across that's coming from these different activist groups. And there's a lot to choose from out there.
So from a Greenwich High alumnus to a Greenwich High School student, last question, bring us home.
I have two short questions, if it's okay. So first question, you spoke a little bit earlier about, I think you said almost $1 billion worth of people leaving the state. Is that correct?
I think it was 2015, it was like 6 billion net worth loss.
I just wanted to ask, was that like a lot of sort of lower kind of income, or less higher?
No, it was high income people leaving. So this was IRS tax data. So they measure up to 200,000 and above. And that's where the big chunk came from. We lose, the two groups that we lose the most of are retirees going to South, and young people, because they graduate high school or they graduate college here, and they need to go find work. And there are some major hubs of employment activity in the country, and they're not here. So, and you can go down to the Carolina, Raleigh, Raleigh, North Carolina, huge, was it a tech hub now, I think. Austin's blowing up. You can go to the Dakotas and work in an oil field and make 6 figures. So the jobs are elsewhere, and so you lose the young people. Either they go away to college and they don't come back. So yeah, that figure, that was high income individuals leaving.
And then for the second question, so very recently, there's been like a pretty decent spike in COVID cases. And I think it's kind of been like a little bit misportrayed, because until very recently, the spike in COVID cases would pretty closely correlate with the spike in deaths. Whereas with this most recent spike, deaths have remained almost flat compared to the past. Do you think that sort of like the kind of fear that we're getting into another like surge as we did at the beginning will lead to any more like declarations of emergency or more orders to kind of dampen our economy?
And I've learned to never gamble on politics, but I don't think there's any appetite for any kind of lockdown or more mandates or anything like that. And there's not an appetite for it in the public, and I think there's not an appetite for it at the State House either. That's just me doing my best to read the tea leaves, but yeah, I think if any state tried to go like full lockdown again, unless the disease somehow becomes so much worse, I can't see it happening.
Yep, I agree. All right, well, thanks everyone for your time. We ran over. Thanks a lot, Jenny, to our great media producer, for producing this, and thanks everyone for coming. We'll do another one of these about a different topic in January. Have a good night.